policy. Are you going to choose them or the community? It's them or us.
Damn, that's a hard line
The community
stance.
was pretty pissed off, believing that it
God
was
damn.
Bungie who was
Jesus,
issuing
Biff.
all these unfair takedowns,
Things a bit
DMCA
spooky.
takedowns. And the series of tweets concluded with hate to at you all on a Sunday morning this early, and I believe these are all community managers, but this is getting out of hand. I, for one, am laying the blame at the feet of CSC. Reminder to everyone, the community managers and Bungie didn't do this. John Hope.
So did they take it down, or was it claimed? I may have misheard. Let me see. Oh, it got striked. Wait, that's... So, what? Wait, what? They don't even make any money off that. Usually when someone's impersonating a company and doing, like, copyright abuse on the YouTube system, it's claiming, because then you get the money from the video. And YouTube doesn't ask any questions, so you just get the money. You get nothing from striking it, except sued by Bungie, I suppose.
CFC, which is the company that handles Bungie's copyright stuff, needs to be reined in hard and reminded of your policy. Are you going to choose recent TWAB video was taken down and copyright struck? What is going
Thanks for
on?
your subs, Sleaze.
The
The 2 gift subs,
video
Hazy.
doesn't even allow us to check what was wrong. So yeah, from March 20th, 2022, CFC, which is the company that handles Bungie's copyright stuff, needs to be reined in hard and reminded of your policy. Are you going to choose recent TWAB video was taken down and copyright struck? What is going on?
Thanks for your subs, Sleaze. The 2 gift subs, Hazy.
Doesn't even allow us. Onwards, there were widespread reports of a number of content creators who were getting their Destiny content unfairly taken down by DMCA, and people were just confused why this was happening, what's going on, what's their recourse given that this is their livelihoods. Beyond that, a number of YouTube channels who have been up for a while now uploading Destiny soundtracks, many of those tracks were being taken down.
Damn, they got everything.
All of this was discussed in this Reddit thread with almost
Thanks to Prime
4,500
Verbet.
upvotes that links to all the different occasions and situations and scenarios where these DMCA takedowns happened. Now, Bungie was quick to respond and assured everyone that this is
Tier 1
not them,
ethanol.
that they're going to look into it and try to resolve it. They tweeted, "We're aware of a series of copyright takedowns on YouTube and we're actively investigating. This includes content on our own Bungie channels. These actions are not being taken at the request of Bungie or our partners. Please stand by for future updates." So bizarrely enough, not only were Destiny videos of content creators being taken down, but
Yeah, that's so
Destiny videos.
bold.
videos
That's
crazy.
so
were
fucking bold.
being DMCA struck, which obviously isn't normal, and goes to highlight that Bungie really wasn't behind this. They were just as confused as everyone, and that clearly some third party was engaging nefariously. And once people came to that realization, things calmed down a bit.
Exit
with
Tier
Biff
1 Jordan.
being, "This was not Bungie
And
or
yeah, I've
one
heard
of
of
their
that game.
partners. It's unclear who did this, but one thing is clear. Third party is to blame, not Bungie or their partners. We'll get to the bottom of this together." Here we have another response from Twitter user Cheese Forever, who
Very-
tweeted, "Bungie got
very,
by
very
fake
Enigma.
copyright claims. I don't know if anyone has heard the stories, but basically any company can claim they own any audio on YouTube, leading to false claims to take profit from individuals."
So I'm sure we'll get to motive in a moment, but a couple people in chat have said that the leading theory is that this was orchestrated by a group that was angry at Bungie for when their content got actually taken down by Bungie. So they just wanted to cause as much harm as possible. But inadvertently, those dudes might end up being heroes. Like, they'll definitely face some real big legal ramifications once they get identified, and I don't think that they're super turbo masterminds who are somehow going to evade Bungie and whatever extremely expensive subpoenas and whatever else they're going to use to find them. But Bungie now might actually change YouTube for the better. All as a result of some fucking turbo virgins going a little too wild. So those dudes might end up just being like actual saviors.
Looks like that's happening with Bungie Music, essentially spotlighting the lapse in DMCA security on YouTube's part. Anyone can go to the website and pretend to be anyone and copyright claim anything. And while
Lelouch
false
strat,
claims tend to
true.
eventually be resolved, it'll still waste people's time and money and put content creators' livelihoods at risk or cause a whole lot of harm. And it can happen to not only individual creators, but
So that's a good question. I don't mean to keep cutting it off, but how would Bungie even find them? I think it'd actually be super easy. So in order to file those, it's actually a pretty tedious process. So in order to file those kind of takedowns, you have to give a lot of information, and that information has to be somewhat verifiable. Like, you can't have a bot that does it. So there is real people on the other end of it using, at some level, real information. So once Bungie subpoenas YouTube, they're fucked. Like, all of that is fucked. And in this article, it does say that they are subpoenaing, I believe, right? Yeah, it will discover them soon via subpoena or otherwise. So I don't think there's any chance they're somehow going to evade that, because
That's crazy.
they did take the shit down, which means they did provide legitimate information somewhere along that pipeline, which Bungie will get. Is there any truth to these rumors? What?
Bungie said they finna get that check.
What? It's not a rumor. A ton of Destiny videos were taken down, including Bungie's own Destiny videos, by a group that is not affiliated with Bungie. What the fuck you what? Oh, he's talking about the theory. Oh. Yeah, no, nothing about that. That I think is still just a theory according to chat. He hasn't mentioned it yet. I'm just going by what chat's been saying. But regardless of whether or not that was the motive, what is clear is that people were behind false takedowns, and there is a subpoena most likely on its way from Bungie, and a lawsuit is in effect.
To major companies like Bungie as well, which really spotlights the lapse in security on YouTube's part. Now, slowly we did
some
start
sweaty
seeing
waft in the
struck
prime
down Destiny
player and
content
future.
coming back.
There's a
Biff, for
pancake.
example, tweeted this the following day on March 21st, 2022. Sigh of relief, no video today, but at least this one is back up. Hopefully this mess can be sorted out sometime soon. Bungie then issued another response on March 24th, 2022. Clicking on the link will take you to this blog post, and in one of the sections they highlighted how going forward we'll be allowing certain Destiny music tracks to be uploaded on channels for archival purposes, with 3 conditions outlined here. It cannot be a soundtrack song that Bungie has already released or posted elsewhere publicly. The content cannot be monetized. The creator needs to obtain permission from Bungie by contacting this email, licensing@bungie.com. So as long as the intention is archiving and preserving the music, it should be no problem as long as Bungie's made aware of it. So they're being more lenient and flexible about this aspect, and a lot of people found this to be good news. Thank you.
I also would like to say one thing. While I don't like Destiny 2, like, at all, I think it's very boring, I really like the way Bungie handles internet content creation. They do the hypest shit for their streamers. What was it? I think it was last year, or maybe the year before. They did something where gifting a sub to your favorite Destiny streamer got you in-game items. So they just wanted to show support to the content creators that play Destiny, and I thought that was so fucking generous. Like, I thought that was such a cute idea. Final Fantasy XIV did that too? Who did it first? I'm curious. Because that is a really adorable idea, just showing support to the people that love the game. Final Fantasy XIV did it first? Even still, not many games do that. Not many companies do that. So even if Final Fantasy XIV was first, it's still very nice that Destiny followed suit. Thanks to the resub, Navixian and Berto.
Thank you, and everyone that made this happen. I'll be sending an email out as soon as I can. I want to make sure I'm doing everything right. And then Biff also tweeted about this in a positive light. Big win for the archivists. Super glad that Bungie is willing to extend a hand of faith to people saving Destiny's music. I know quite a few of them, and the passion this community has for preserving Destiny's music is fierce. Love that they finally got clarity on this. Keep in mind that Bungie does vault Destiny content, which means that there's some content from the past that's gone forever, and that music would also be lost if it weren't for the archivists. So for that purpose, people are cheering that Bungie is being flexible on this. And Bungie's response and reaction to this whole situation, they've handled it very well, and they've kept in touch with the community, and they've made sure that people are aware that Bungie isn't doing this, and they're seeking recourse, and they've just been handling the situation correctly, so kudos to Bungie on that front.
I completely agree.
Which finally brings us to what's been revealed about this whole situation. This was first reported by news outlet Torn Freak in an article whose headline reads, Bungie files lawsuit to punish senders of fake Destiny DMCA notices. So Bungie's not playing around here. They are engaging in a full-on lawsuit, And in the lawsuit, they have gone on to explain what they think happened. And based on what I read, it honestly seems pretty legitimate what they've presented. So the article begins with a minority of online actors view DMCA notices as tools to disrupt and disappear content that isn't infringing at all.
Oh, we're getting goofy.
The DMCA system has been abused time and again, be it by trolls or by people who are not pleased by certain criticisms in a video, so they try to take it down that way, who abuse the system
Big Fat?
for their own reasons, for selfish reasons, for reasons that are not legitimate, that are not what DMCA laws were made for. Bungie issued another statement revealing that the takedown notices were sent from a fraudulent Google account that was crafted to mimic anti-piracy partner CSC. Google eventually terminated the account, began reversing the fraudulent takedowns while removing copyright strikes against YouTube users. Bungie went on to criticize Google for processing the fake notices, but noted that the company had agreed to implement improvements to reduce such mistakes in the future.
Yeah, hey Bungie, if you're listening, that's what they said to us like 2 years ago. Either they're really cooking up something fierce over there, or they're just placating. When we brought that shit up to their policy team, whenever we talked to them, that is the same shit they were telling us, and it's been 2 years. I would say they're not moving fast or moving at all on that front. So I'd say don't let that give you any kind of security there. Just continue hog wild, go full throttle with your lawsuit. It's the only way to make them do anything, it seems.
Google acted to clean up the mess, but it's now clear that Bungie isn't prepared to let this go now that they've gone ahead and filed a full-blown lawsuit in the United States to identify the culprits and hold them to account. What I do love about this is that Bungie isn't just going after the frauds who pretended to be Bungie and took down the videos and harmed community sentiment against Bungie momentarily and caused this whole mess for both Bungie and the Destiny content creators, but the fact that they're actually highlighting that YouTube is part of the issue, the way they've implemented the DMCA system is just so broken and exploitable. For years, people have been calling out YouTube for this, but they have done nothing about it, and now a major company, Bungie, has been afflicted by this, and even they're complaining about the process of getting a hold of YouTube and resolving situations like this quickly. But I'll get to that in a bit. For now, here are more details. Late Friday, Bungie filed a lawsuit in a Washington court against John Doe's 1 through 10, the currently anonymous senders of the fraudulent DMCA notices. So,
bro, you already know all 10 of those dudes are in a Discord call right now, losing their collective fucking minds.
Yep.
Like, I doubt they're hardened criminals ready to be like Jack Bauer getting tortured with like fucking car battery clamped onto their nipples or whatever in court. There's no chance. Like, they are gonna go fucking scary. Like, they're gonna be very frightened by this. Which is probably why they immediately released all of the takedowns. I am very curious to see how this is going to play out, because they're not going to be able to stay anonymous after a subpoena.
Damn.
At all. Thanks to the resub cat and the prime instinct. The only thing they can pray for is that they're not 18. Like, if one of them's 17 and 3 months old, he might want to just turn himself in and get a lighter sentence. Bungie has... Actually, I'm curious. I think Bungie's a multi-billion-dollar company, right? Let me see. Because Destiny 2 is so huge. What about, like, revenue report 2021? Oh, no. I guess I'm wrong. 200 million.
A shot of liquid courage, a shared moment of bonding and escapism, even drugged-up zombie soldiers. Violence and mind-altering substances have always gone hand in hand. The truth is, countless wars throughout history have been fought while soldiers were drunk or high, and military conflict through the ages, including the modern day, have been shaped by the insane drugs soldiers are fed to win wars. Drinking and drugging rituals have long been a part of the culture of warfare. Indulging in alcohol or drugs together can help soldiers bond before going into battle, provide a much-needed way to cope with the trauma of war, and even enhance combat performance. Alcohol is the oldest, most tried-and-true drug of choice for warriors around the world, and armies have issued alcohol rations to their troops throughout history. The Russians favored vodka, while the British preferred rum. Germans have turned to beer, while ancient Romans and Greeks relied on wine for liquid courage. But armies from ancient times all the way up to today have often relied on even stronger drugs to win wars. According to the ancient legends, Nordic berserkers, the legendary Viking warriors who fought ferociously and without fear, were said to get their animalistic fighting powers from the animal skins they wore in battle. Recently, though, modern researchers have come to believe that their ferocity came from another source altogether, the black henbane plant. The plant's leaves could be dried and smoked or used to make wine and beer. The plant was a powerful hallucinogen, causing users to see and perceive things that aren't there. Berserkers believed that they were calling upon their gods and harnessing the powers of the spirit world to help them thrive on the battlefield. And it's likely that the trance-like state caused by ingesting the black henbane contributed to this feeling. While herbal drugs may usually be associated with a calm, peaceful high, they've also been known to cause intense anxiety, paranoia, and even panic. Given that these warriors were psyching themselves up for battle when they took the black henbane, it's highly likely that the effects were less mellow and more aggressive. They probably felt agitated and ready to fight, and felt dissociated from reality, making it easier for them to fight like wild animals and kill with abandon. Viking berserkers weren't the only ancient figures to tap into the powers of natural herbs. Eurasian warriors, especially Siberian tribes like the Chukchi and Koryaks, use psilocybin, more commonly known as magic mushrooms, to allow them to fight fearlessly and give them an edge in battle. And they even went so far as to drink the urine of the warriors who had previously ingested the mushrooms to take advantage of the residual psychoactive effects. Use of magic mushrooms and other natural psychoactive herbs continued into the 19th and 20th centuries. In 1879, when the British tried to subdue the Zulu tribe of Africa, they faced an enemy that seemed immune to fear even in the face of Britain's far more advanced weapons. Though the Zulu only carried spears and shields, they seemed unnervingly unafraid of the British's rifles and bullets. They likely had a little medicinal help in this department. The Zulu warriors had a multitude of mind-altering substances at their disposal, from medicated beer, chaga, a South African variety of cannabis, to a powerful painkiller made from the Bushman poison bulb plant, which also had hallucinogenic properties. Thanks to the psychoactive properties of these drugs, the Zulu warriors would have felt disconnected from the reality of battle, allowing them to fight ferociously and without fear. Though the Zulus would unfortunately go on to lose the war, they did impress the British with their willingness to face death without fear, thanks to the help of pharmacology. As the nature of warfare changed and weapons and technology advanced, so too did the drugs that were used to fuel soldiers and win wars. World War I saw the first documented and widespread use of cocaine in battle. Both the British and Germans issued cocaine rations to their Air Force fighter pilots to give them a boost before they engaged in incredibly dangerous dogfights. World War I fighter pilots were tasked with a nearly impossible mission. They had to engage other aircraft in close combat in midair. They needed to dodge enemy planes while simultaneously trying to get the enemy in their crosshairs so their gunner could take them out, all while making sure not to crash their planes. It was a chaotic and terrifying environment, and cocaine helped the pilots keep their energy up and helped them focus on the job at hand, without getting carried away by the very real fear that death could come at any moment. The Canadian infantrymen who also relied on cocaine called it forced march, since that was exactly what it was used for. Infantry troops that needed to be mobilized and moved long distances during the war often had to do so on their own 2 feet, enduring grueling marches through desolate, war-torn landscapes, knowing all the while the enemy could be anywhere waiting to attack. These marches could last for hours or even days, and once again, cocaine was their secret to success. The forced march pills, which were a combination of cocaine and caffeine, gave soldiers the energy and endurance to withstand hours of marching through difficult terrain to get to where they were needed, but also helped to blunt the fear that the enemy could be waiting for them around the next corner. The most famous stories of soldiers on drugs might have come from World War II, which is fitting considering that the entire 6-year conflict was largely fueled by speed. A favorite of the frontline soldiers on both sides, the Nazis' drug of choice was called Pervitin. It was an early version of crystal meth, and the German company Temmler Werke supplied the German military with 29 million of these so-called attack pills. Not to be outdone by their enemies, the Allies followed suit and issued millions of benzodrine tablets to their soldiers. The British are estimated to have consumed around 72 million tablets, while the
crazy.
Pentagon's official estimates is that U.S. soldiers consumed between 250 and 500 million pills during the war. Bennies, as they were known, were even included in emergency kits for American bomber crews. Both the German attack pills and the Allied bennies provided their users with a boost of energy to help them cope with drawn-out battles and long-distance marches. It increased alertness and combated fatigue, which was helpful for keeping vigilant during long periods of watch duty and bolstered already exhausted soldiers who were about to go into battle. It also created a strong sense of confidence and bravado in the soldiers, allowing them to rush into enemy fire with little regard for their own life or safety. The role that speed played in World War II cannot be overstated. Experts now say that many of the Germans' early and decisive victories in the war were thanks in large part to the rampant use of Providin. The drug helped German soldiers march for hours past their breaking point, allowing them to capture huge amounts of territory relatively quickly. Historical accounts from early battles in Belgium described crazed German soldiers fearlessly charging directly towards machine gun nests, seemingly unaware of the hail of automatic gunfire raining down on them. This behavior understandably frightened the Belgian defenders, and it might have led to the widespread rumor that Germany had created unbeatable super soldiers. Even as these harder drugs entered the fray, they didn't fully replace the more natural substances of past centuries. The Soviets were rumored to have been on magic mushrooms during the Battle of Czerkesfehérvár in 1945, where they performed fearlessly and succeeded in capturing the city from the well-entrenched and much better equipped Nazis. Authorized drug use by American soldiers continued into the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, and the Vietnam War from 55 to 73, though it was now combined with rampant non-sanctioned drug use. Speed continued to be the approved drug of choice, but now soldiers gained access to illicit drugs like heroin. Desperate soldiers would combine these two powerful drugs to create their own homemade injectable speedballs. This potent combination creates a push-pull effect, both boosting energy and helping them relax. The high from these speedballs was stronger and more lasting than the high they could get from using either drug on its own, and it helped the soldiers deal with the brutal conditions of war, as well as cope with the horrible atrocities they witnessed and even committed during these wars. Drug use during the Vietnam War reached epidemic levels, according to the Pentagon, by the time the U.S. withdrew from the war in 1973. Some 70% of all American soldiers in Vietnam had taken drugs. Shockingly, the authorized use of drugs by soldiers in combat continues around the world to this day. Modern-day terrorists have no qualms about using drugs to motivate their fighters and achieve their heinous missions. The terrorist group ISIS promotes the use of hashish and opioid painkillers within their ranks, and they're also well known for the pervasive use of the drug Captagon, a powerful stimulant that metabolizes in the body to form an amphetamine. This drug increases alertness, numbs fear, and induces a sense of courage and bravado, and so it's incredibly popular with jihadists undertaking suicide missions. The drug's also reported to increase strength, and there have been reports of fighters taking so much of the drug that even after being shot multiple times, they refuse to drop and continue to fight through their injuries. Even smaller terrorist organizations have capitalized on the power of drugs to create seemingly invincible soldiers. In his book, A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, Ishmael Bey describes his horrendous experience as a child soldier in Sierra Leone and the rampant use of drugs to control and manipulate child soldiers in these loosely organized armies. According to Bey, the commanders would strategically keep their child soldiers high on what they called brown browns, a potent and highly addictive combination of cocaine and gunpowder. Gunpowder contains nitroglycerin, which helps the cocaine to spread more quickly through the bloodstream and delivers a faster, more intense high. Once these child soldiers were high on brown browns, they would essentially be immune to fear and would have little to no conscience. Their commanders would take advantage of this altered state and force the children to commit terrible atrocities while they were high. This knowledge and shame that they'd done such horrible things while high, combined with a heavy dependence on the addictive drugs, kept the child soldiers loyal, obedient, and easy to control. And it's not just the so-called bad guys still feeding the drugs to their soldiers the present day. As long as all procedures are followed to a T, the U.S. military still issues amphetamines to pilots assigned to 8+ hour-long flight missions. These dexedrine pills, known as Go pills, promote wakefulness and keep their pilots alert on long endurance missions. To help soldiers calm down after battle and to combat the energy-boosting effects of the dexedrine pills, the U.S. military also issues what they call no-go pills, or sleeping pills, to help soldiers recover and be ready for their next mission. Other countries are following suit. In the UK, France, and India, the drug modafinil has recently replaced amphetamines for use in endurance missions and to combat sleep deprivation among pilots and other members of the military. The history of warfare and the history of drug use are inextricably linked, and with modern militaries continuing to use substances to alter their soldiers and enhance their performance, this is a trend that shows no signs of slowing down. It'll certainly be fascinating to see what kind of insane drugs soldiers are fed to win wars in the years to come. If you thought this video was fascinating, be sure and check out our other videos like this one, called What Does Heroin Do to Your Body? Or perhaps you'd like this other video instead. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.
Why, you gonna try to feed me the thing that you put the tea lid on?
It was washed.
Oh.
You're not gonna eat that? Because it had the lid on it.
What?
It was a crime that rocked the world. August 9th, 1969. Hmm. Jesus, that's so long. This is still more interesting. The year is 2024. My name is Annie, and I'm the roommate of Theodore Ted Bundy. In this video today, you'll learn all about Ted's personality. As much as he can be known for such a secretive and deceptive man, you'll also hear how Mr. Bundy struggles with modern law enforcement techniques, surveillance technology, and how he manages to navigate today's progressive environment as a man who could be said to be the least progressive human in modern history, the epitome of so-called male toxicity. With this in mind, you might not be surprised to learn that in 2024, Ted is an outspoken advocate of the women's rights movement. That's how Annie, got to know Ted. We both worked on a crisis hotline together where Ted spoke for hours, helping people, mostly women, in their time of need. Ted was always friendly to me and seemed caring, so when he suggested we share an apartment, I agreed. I'm a former cop, and Ted studies psychology at the University of Washington. Naturally, we both have lots to talk about. He's usually very open with me. He's told me all about his illegitimate birth when his mother Louise fell pregnant when she was just 16. Ted told me Louise was embarrassed and lied to him, making him believe his grandparents were his parents.
That's confusing me. Oh. What the fuck? This website is, or this page seems interesting.
There are 195 recognized countries in the world doing their best to navigate the unforgiving arena of global geopolitics. However, only one country among them has been unrivaled as the world's supreme military power for years, the United States. And that's why it shouldn't be surprising that this military titan might be ranked as the #1 military power once again in 2024. To be fair, quantifying military power is a tricky endeavor, as the numbers don't always tell the whole story. However, the U.S.'s dominance extends far beyond mere statistics, encompassing cutting-edge technological innovation, logistical prowess, and unparalleled operational capabilities that cement its status as the world's preeminent military force. So in this video, we will play the numbers game, but we'll also look at what those numbers represent. Regarding the numbers, we'll primarily consult Global Firepower's Military Strength Rankings, an annual report that comprehensively assesses military capabilities worldwide. For 2024, Global Firepower, or GFP for short, evaluated 145 countries across 60 individual factors to determine each nation's military strength. Some of these factors are troop numbers, military equipment, and financial stability. Again, accurately ranking military power involves more than just numbers. For instance, one country might possess a large tank fleet filled with outdated or poorly maintained vehicles, while another may have a smaller fleet composed of modern, well-maintained tanks equipped with advanced technology. However, while the exact GFP ranking might be off for a few countries, the data is accurate primarily from official sources. So without further ado, let's dive into the state of the U.S. military in 2024 to understand why this country commands the respect and the fear of nations around the globe. First, let's talk about money. After all, no country can maintain military dominance without substantial financial investment. And when it comes to the U.S.'s annual defense spending budget, calling it a substantial financial investment might just be the understatement of the century. Why? The defense budget the U.S. Congress approved for 2024 is a staggering $886 billion, roughly 3.3% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP. Though this number is insanely impressive in and of itself, it becomes mind-blowing when you consider how much other nations are spending on defense. The #2 nation, China, plans to spend $236.1 billion on defenses in 2024, a notable 7.2% leap from nation China. Though this roughly 3.3% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP. Though this number is insanely impressive in and of itself, it becomes mind-blowing when you consider how much other nations are spending on defense. The #2 nation, China, plans to spend $236.1 billion on defenses in 2024, a notable 7.2% leap from the previous year. This increase is even higher with the third-ranked nation, Russia, which intends to spend around $109 billion on national defense, approximately 30% more than in 2023. As monumental as the difference between the U.S.'s military budget and the ones from the second and third-ranking countries, it's also important to note that the U.S. probably won't see any significant increases in defense spending anytime soon. You see, the increase in the U.S. military budget was capped at 1% in 2023 thanks to a 2-year budget deal. But even after those 2 years pass, financial experts don't see significant changes in the U.S.'s military budget for at least 2 more years. Afterward, the experts estimate that the budget could gradually rise to $922 billion in 2035. But let's go back to the present for now. What is the U.S. spending its military budget on? Though this budget must cover numerous aspects of a standing fighting force, 4 areas might be the most crucial: operation and maintenance, research and development of weapons and equipment, procurement of weapons and systems, and military personnel. Speaking of military personnel, number-wise, how strong is the U.S. military in 2024? Let's start with the total available military manpower. This figure refers to the total number of people a nation could mobilize in the event of a war, be it offensive or defensive in nature. Remember that this number can only be estimated and represents a rough picture of the potential force size, not an exact count. According to GFP estimates, the U.S. could commit almost 150 million people to its war effort, roughly 44% of its total population. Though this figure is undoubtedly impressive, it isn't the highest in the world. Of course, this shouldn't be surprising, as the U.S. isn't the most populous country in the world. That title belongs to India, closely followed by China, with each country having more than 1.4 billion people. With this discrepancy in population in mind, it's perfectly understandable that India and China rank better in terms of total manpower, both being able to commit over 650 million people to their respective war efforts. A similar situation can be seen in the number of people fit for military service. As the name suggests, these are the able-bodied people who could theoretically fight or participate in material production during a long-running war campaign. The U.S. roughly has 124 million troops, while India and China can offer 4 to 5 times more. But let's move away from potential scenarios. How many active duty personnel does the U.S. have in 2024? In other words, how many soldiers are currently engaged in full-time military work and could be ready to fight for the nation at any given moment? The answer is approximately 1.3 million highly trained individuals. Though this figure places the U.S. in the top 3 countries in the world, it's important to note that the number of active duty personnel has been declining for quite some time. That's why the current figures are far from the most recent peak of over 2 million active duty soldiers in 1987. But what about reserve personnel? Unfortunately, this isn't where the U.S. shines in the 2024 military power ranking. But before delving into the details, let's explain the difference between active and reserve duty. Think of it this way. Active duty is a full-time job, while reserve duty can be compared to a part-time job. Reservists are considered an optional military component and are basically on call for service at any given moment. The U.S. has almost 800,000 of these reservists as part of its military force in 2024. The figure is nowhere near Vietnam's 5 million reservists, which occupies the #1 position globally. It's also significantly lower than 3 other nations in the top 5 in the military power ranking of 2024. South Korea, with over 3 million reservists, Russia with approximately 2 million, and India with roughly 1.15 million reserve duty personnel. The only other country in the top 5 with fewer reservists is China, which has 500,000. There are 2 ways to look at this number, one more positive and the other quite the opposite. On one hand, the relatively low number of reservists in the U.S. could be attributed to the country's reliance on a well-established active duty force and sophisticated military technology. On the other hand, the number of U.S. reservists could be related to how overused the military component is. As things currently stand, some reservists are expected to provide daily support to global military operations, essentially changing the very nature of this military element. This could have something to do with fewer people deciding to join the military as a reservist. But speaking of joining the military, which options do individuals have when considering enlistment in the U.S. military? The United States Armed Forces collectively manages 3 major service branches: the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Navy. In addition to the 3 main military branches, the U.S. has 3 other notable military divisions: the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Space Force, and the U.S. Coast Guard. 5 of these branches are managed by the Department of Defense. The U.S. Coast Guard is the only exception, falling under the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security. But what exactly are these departments managing in 2024? Let's find out. First, let's get the numbers out of the way. Number 1 is the Army, the largest and oldest service in the U.S., with roughly 452,000 active duty soldiers. This is the smallest total the Army has been since 1940, a year before the U.S. joined World War II. In second place, we have the Navy, the U.S.'s forward deployed force. In 2024, this branch had approximately 347,000 active duty sailors. As with the Army, the U.S. generally isn't satisfied with the number, as it falls short of desired readiness levels and strategic objectives. Third-ranking branch is the Air Force, closely following the Navy with approximately 324,000 active duty personnel. The Department of Defense describes the Air Force as having rapid, flexible, and lethal air and space capability. Next up, the Marine Corps, a component of the Department of the Navy, which accounts for about 172,000 of the U.S.'s active duty personnel. This just leaves us with one more Department of Defense-controlled branch, the U.S. Space Force. Due to the unique nature of this branch, it shouldn't be surprising that it's by far the smallest, encompassing only about 9,400 active personnel. It also makes it the smallest branch in the U.S. military in general, as the Department of Homeland Security-managed Coast Guard has 41,700 active duty service members. However, the number of military personnel in each branch is just one aspect of their military might. The other, arguably even more important aspect, is the equipment and technology they possess. In this regard, we'll focus on 3 areas of attack. Let's look at U.S. land, air power, and naval power. We'll start with the U.S.'s might on the ground. Though it took some time, the U.S. ground forces have finally started departing from the Cold War era thinking focused on containment. Slowly but surely, these forces are becoming significantly more agile and adaptable, reflecting the requirements of the modern battlefield. For this endeavor, the U.S. ground forces primarily rely on combat tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, and multiple launch rocket systems. So let's break down the U.S.'s capabilities in these departments. When it comes to tanks, the M1 Abrams continues to lead the way, making up for a good portion of the country's 4,657 tanks. This figure makes the U.S. the NATO country with the highest number of tanks. However, the same cannot be said for the world, as this position belongs to Russia, which has over 14,000 tanks. While Russia's main battle tank, the T-72, is far inferior to the U.S.'s Abrams tanks, the same cannot be said for the T-14 Armata, which was designed to rival and even surpass its Western counterparts' capabilities. Regarding infantry fighting vehicles, the widely respected M2 Bradley remains a cornerstone of the U.S. ground forces, providing formidable firepower and mobility. However, we mustn't forget about the Stryker armored vehicles that have allowed the U.S. ground forces to cover a myriad of battlefield roles with as many as 10 variants of this Canadian-made vehicle. So it's no wonder that some 10% of all U.S. infantry fighting vehicles are Stryker armored vehicles. These include 1,789 M1126 infantry carrier vehicles, or ICVs, 545 M1127 reconnaissance vehicles, or RVs, 441 M1129 mortar carriers, MCs, 348 M1130 commanders vehicles, or CVs, 304 M1133 medical evacuation vehicles, or MEVs. The remainder of some 360,000 frontline, second line, and support vehicles are mostly wheeled types designed for urban fighting, based on experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. This impressive figure also makes the U.S. the #1 country in the world in terms of infantry fighting vehicles, as they possess more than double these vehicles compared to the next countries on the list, China and Russia. Unfortunately, the U.S. artillery systems don't showcase the same superiority. Here we'll look at 2 artillery systems, self-propelled and towed. Both these systems have a pretty self-explanatory name. The former can move independently on tracks or wheels, while the latter requires a separate vehicle to position it on the battlefield. The U.S. operates an equal number of both these systems. It has almost 1,600 self-propelled guns, and almost all of them are M109 Paladin tracked vehicles. As for their towed counterparts, there are about 1,267 of them used by the U.S. military. Roughly 820 of those are the M777 howitzer-class systems operated by the Army and Marine Corps. This just leaves us with multiple launch rocket systems. These systems aim to provide rapid and widespread firepower against ground targets, typically using rockets or missiles launched from a mobile platform. The U.S. ground forces operate almost 700 of these handy systems, with the M142 HIMARS launcher making up more than a quarter of the total number. Now it's time to take flight. How does the U.S. rank in terms of air power in 2024? The answer is simple. In the air, the U.S. is second to none. With over 13,000 service-available airframes, the U.S. maintains the world's most formidable air force with a diverse fleet of aircraft. So let's inspect this fleet in more detail. The U.S. Air Force is one of the few services worldwide that operates a dedicated bomber fleet with aircraft capable of both conventional and nuclear attacks. The standout bomber aircraft in this fleet include the B-1B Lancer as the backbone of the U.S.'s long-range bomber force. The Air Force operates 39 of those high-level bombers, which can carry the highest payload of 75,000 pounds. The B-2 Spirit, it's a multi-role bomber capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear warheads. Due to a high per-unit cost, only 21 of these aircraft are in the U.S. fleet, but the amount of firepower these units bring more than makes up for their modest number. The B-52 Stratofortress is a long-range heavy bomber that can fly at high subsonic speeds at altitudes of up to 50,000 feet. The U.S. force has used these bombers since the 1950s and operates 72 units. Next up, the U.S. Air Force's fighter aircraft fleet. These aircraft remain the frontline defenders for the U.S. Air Force, which operates as many as 1,854. Let's list the most notable among them. The F-15 Eagle is an all-weather, extremely maneuverable tactical fighter, represented by over 500 units. The F-16 Fighting Falcon is a compact multi-role fighter that's relatively low cost. That last factor explains why the Air Force operates 775 of these fighters, the most of any model. The F-22 Raptor is a supersonic all-weather stealth fighter that can perform both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. The Air Force has 177 of these premier aircraft. The F-35A Lightning II, the U.S. Air Force's latest fifth-generation fighter, accounts for 310 units. Though these aircraft might be the first you think of, the U.S. Air Force fleet doesn't solely consist of aircraft designed to engage in combat or intercept other aircraft. It also includes aircraft designed for various other crucial missions, such as refueling, transport, and reconnaissance. Here are some of the more notable aircraft fulfilling these roles. First up, tanker aircraft, designed to extend the operational range of other aircraft. The U.S. Air Force has over 2,600 of these valuable aircraft, including the following: 388 KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling tankers, 61 KC-46A Pegasus aerial refueling and strategic military transport aircraft, 40 KC-10 Extender advanced tanker and cargo aircraft. As for transport aircraft, the U.S. Air Force operates over 950 units of the most diverse design, with the C-17 Globemaster III as the primary hauler with 228 units. Interestingly, this fleet also includes limited numbers of special aircraft designed to transport VIP individuals, such as U.S. leaders and high-ranking government and Department of Defense officials. So, for instance, there's only one C-20 and 4 C-32 aircraft. When it comes to reconnaissance, the following aircraft play a significant role: 13 MC-12W Liberty medium to low altitude twin-engine turboprop aircraft, 14 E-8C Joint Stars Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar Systems, and 26 U-2S Dragon Lady subsonic high-altitude spy planes. Finally, two more notable pieces of equipment to cover: helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. The former category includes approximately 5,737 units, which are instrumental to the U.S. military. Due to their flexibility and tactical usefulness, these helicopters can be deployed to various missions, including search and rescue, medical evacuation, and special operations support. However, these rotorcraft units can also attack. The U.S. owns about 1,000 dedicated attack helicopters that can provide on-call fire support for ground forces, neutralize armored vehicles, or counter dug-in enemy force elements. Lastly, unmanned aerial vehicles. This is another area where the U.S. absolutely demolishes any competition. The country's armed services operates one of the largest UAV forces, with over 16,000 units. These drones are primarily intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance types, or ISR, but direct attack units are also included. Now that we covered the U.S.'s land and air power, let's dive into and explore the strength of the U.S. naval forces in 2024. By now, you probably won't be surprised to learn that these forces also beat out potential competitors by a considerable margin. Sure, with 472 vessels, the U.S. might not have the largest fleet in terms of size. However, the U.S. Navy boasts unmatched technological sophistication and operational capabilities, ensuring dominance in both traditional and asymmetric maritime warfare scenarios. The U.S. Navy also dominates the number game in areas where it matters the most on the sea: carriers. The U.S. currently has 11 carrier ships, which is more than all the other countries in the world combined. To be fair, 10 of these are the Nimitz-class nuclear-powered carriers that still utilize Cold War technologies to some extent. Still, they remain formidable assets, complemented by the newer, more advanced Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier, which promises to take the U.S. military's naval capabilities to new heights. The U.S. is also number one in the helicopter carrier department, with 9 impressive warships. Even though these warships are smaller and less expensive to procure, other notable military forces are yet to keep up. Japan has the most helicopter carriers after the U.S., with only 4. But let's turn up the dramatics and discuss the more aggressive vessels in the Navy's fleet. And what better way to start than with destroyers? Destroyers are advanced multi-role vessels equipped with various sensory equipment processing systems, and weaponry to counter threats from the air, the surface, and under the surface. These ships can operate independently of the main fleet when hunting enemy targets, often completing their missions with unbelievable precision. With all these characteristics in mind, you probably won't be surprised to hear destroyers are rather costly to procure and operate. That's why only a dozen countries in the world own destroyers, most of them operating only a few of these powerful vessels. Now, of course, the same can't be said for the U.S., which owns as many as 75 destroyer-type ships, the most in the world. Among those destroyers, 2 classes are represented: the Arleigh Burke class with 73 destroyers, and the Zumwalt class with 2. Now, let's peek under the surface. There you'll find an impressive fleet of attack submarines, combining Cold War relics with more modern and advanced entries. The first category is filled with vessels like the 26 Los Angeles class, 18 Ohio class, and 3 Seawolf class attack submarines. The second boasts 24 Virginia class submarines that are gradually replacing their older counterparts. Now, while we have to go underwater to view this display of naval might, it's important to know that these submarines can also conduct land attacks, some of them even through nuclear means. And don't get fooled by the name attack submarines, as these vessels can also be used for reconnaissance or to provide support during special forces operations. There are aspects of the naval fleet where the U.S. isn't the leading military force in the world. In fact, the U.S. doesn't even rank in the top 10 in some of them. But if you know anything about the country's determination, you know that this won't last for long. Take frigates, for example. Currently, the U.S. has 0 of these multi-role general-purpose vessels, which places it at the bottom of the 145 countries ranked by global firepower. Though keep in mind that the U.S. rarely uses frigates anymore. However, other powerful countries like Russia and China haven't followed suit. So the U.S. is getting back into the frigate game. The construction started in August 2022 after a 35-year break, and the USS Constellation, the lead class of these vessels, should enter service around 2026. Other areas where the U.S. Navy currently falls short are, number 1, the Corvette-type vessels, which are very similar to frigates. Currently, the Navy operates 23 of these small vessels, which is almost 4 times less than the first-ranking country, Russia. Number 2, the mine and counter-mine warfare ships that lay down or neutralize minefields in strategic waters. As of 2024, the Navy owns 8 of these vessels, a far cry from the 47 owned by the same country that owns the most corvettes, Russia. Finally, there's number 3, the Merchant Marine Force. During wartime, these vessels transport soldiers, supplies, and vehicles. The U.S. owns around 1,800 merchant vessels, so it doesn't even manage to crack the top 10 leading maritime nations. Still, these very few items in no way detract from the extraordinary military might that the U.S. possesses. By now, you should understand why this nation has consistently been ranked number 1 regarding overall military power and capability. All of this boils down to one vital question: how will the U.S. use its military might in 2024? There's a whole barrage of ongoing military operations that either involve the U.S. directly or through international organizations like the United Nations, the UN, the European Union, EU, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Here's a quick overview of the operations involving the U.S. in chronological order. Since 2004, the U.S. has been deploying drone strikes against Islamist militant groups in the war in northwest Pakistan. Since 2010, the same destiny has befallen Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS positions in Yemen, resulting from the effort to combat the Al-Qaeda insurgency in the country. In 2011, U.S. troops were sent to Uganda as advisors to assist in the fight against the Lord's Resistance Army, or the LRA, and its leader, Joseph Kony. In 2014, the U.S. started interventions in Iraq and Syria, aiming to combat the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. In 2021, the U.S. continued its intervention in Somalia by conducting airstrikes on al-Shabaab militants. In 2023, Operation Prosperity Guardian was launched in order to counter the threat by Houthi forces in the Red Sea. Besides conducting specific operations, the U.S. troops are always stationed across different continents to maintain regional stability, provide security assistance to partner nations, conduct joint training exercises, or deter potential adversaries. So, as of 2024, the U.S. has over 100,000 service members in Europe, 30,000 throughout the Middle East, 375,000 in the Indo-Pacific region. From these numbers and the ongoing military operations, it's easy to conclude where the U.S. stands on most matters in terms of foreign policy. For instance, Europe received another 20,000 American soldiers after the Russo-Ukrainian War began in 2022 to enhance its military capabilities. Similarly, the sheer number of troops in the Indo-Pacific region makes it clear that the U.S. prioritizes the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which aims to uphold international norms and principles in the face of increasing assertiveness from countries like China. Did any of this information surprise you? For better or worse, do you see any country surpassing the U.S. as the global military power anytime soon? Share your opinions in the comments section below. Then check out What If USA Launched a Nuclear Bomb Minute by Minute? Or watch this video instead. Russia is running out of airplanes. Yep, you heard that one right. One of the largest powers in the world is at risk of running out of airplanes. You might be wondering, what on earth does that mean? How can a country, especially one with as many resources as Russia, just run out of airplanes? Historically, Russia has been a leader in the aeronautics industry, especially when it comes to fighter jets. So what happened? How did this technological superpower run its plane industry into the ground? Let's take a look. Around early 1939, Russia created the MiG Design Bureau, part of the larger institution MiG Aircraft Building Corporation. The bureau is also part of a state-owned multi-firm aerospace complex, which has its headquarters in Moscow. The bureau was founded when Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered prominent aviation designer Nikolai Polikarpov to develop a new military fighter. However, during World War II, Germany did not mount many strategic bombing raids against the Soviet Union, so MiG interceptors rarely saw action in their primary role. Only in the post-war era did the Design Bureau grow in size and influence. Since its formation at the start of the Second World War, the MiG Design Bureau has been involved in roughly 250 different aircraft projects, of which 120 models reached construction. Since 1939, MiG's main manufacturing plant in Moscow has built over 15,000 aircraft, and by the start of the 21st century, MiG designs accounted for roughly 20% of the world's fighter aircraft. More fighter aircraft were in service than any other type of aircraft. MiG and the Sukhoi Design Bureau share the Russian fighter market equally. However, MiG faced hard times during the 1990s, prompting it to start an intense marketing campaign in the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. MiG also began to diversify, venturing into the civilian market by making passenger planes. Russia has long been a leader in aircraft technology and aviation. Now you might wonder what expertise Russia has in developing such technology and how it became such an aviation superpower. After World War II, technology captured from the Germans allowed the Russians to fast-track their aircraft research and development efforts and produce the first Soviet jet fighter, known as the MiG-9, which had its first flight in 1946. Years later, during the Cold War, some of the USSR's most notable high-speed jet fighters, including the MiG-15, were deployed between the mid-1940s and early 1950s. The MiG-15 shocked Western forces during the Korean War with its speed and agility, cementing the Design Bureau as one of the greats of the military aeronautics industry. The MiG-17, which followed, reached supersonic speeds in test runs. Meanwhile, the MiG-19 was the first mass-produced Soviet supersonic fighter, and the MiG-21 could move about twice the speed of sound. The MiG Design Bureau created over 9,000 MiG-21s in 32 different versions for the Soviet Union Air Force and 40 other countries. In China, the Bureau licensed the version to be produced. The sophisticated MiG-23 Interceptor, the first Soviet operational variable-wing jet fighter, as was the MiG-25 Interceptor, which could go at 3 times the speed of sound, were created in the 1960s. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Design Bureau was largely restructured. To survive the very strained post-communist economy of Russia, the MiG turned mainly toward exporting sales of modernized versions of the MiG-29 as the company continued to advance fighter concepts. You might be wondering, what exactly are these planes? How do fighter planes actually work? Fighter planes are built to allow aircraft to secure control of airspace by destroying enemy aircraft in combat. These fighter planes were meant to outfly and outmaneuver opposing fighters. To fully understand Russia's predicament, with its lack of airplanes and strains on resources, it's crucial to turn to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. For about 3 years now, Russia's been occupying and waging a war against Ukraine. Russia has fully mobilized itself politically, industrially, and militarily. However, the mobilization in Ukraine has depleted resources at a rate that cannot be renewed so fast, as many of Russia's stocks of Cold War-era weapons have been drained. Because Ukrainian tactics are superior in many ways, Ukrainian formations have been able to defeat much larger Russian formations. At the same time, Republican allies of Russia in the U.S. House of Representatives have withheld much of the aid necessary for Ukraine to meet its urgent military and financial needs. So, though Ukrainian tactics have been straining Russian resources in combat, Ukrainian forces often fall short due to a lack of ammunition and other essential resources. Currently, along the nearly 600-mile front line of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, Ukrainians have been able to defeat most Russian attacks, causing catastrophic casualties for under-equipped Russian assault groups. Why are the Russians under-equipped, you might wonder? Russia's strange process for plane manufacturing, coupled with its reliance on foreign parts, limited access to some needed parts, and cannibalization of old planes have all contributed to diminishing returns. But more on that later. Anyways, the Russians have continued to advance against Ukraine, and the one person with the power to stop the Russians' continued occupation of Ukraine, because of the lack of American-made missiles in Ukraine, Russia's missiles and bombs have been attacking the biggest cities in Ukraine, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa, which are becoming increasingly defenseless. 600 Ukrainian civilians, including children, were killed by Russian airstrikes in March 2024 in just one of the countless atrocities faced by Ukrainians as Russia continues to advance. But Russia's continued advances against Ukraine might eventually lead to its own demise. Keep that in mind as we look at the current status of Russia's planes and other weapons. Let's take a look at what the Russian military has been working with since it first attacked Ukraine. In just 26 months of attacking Ukraine, Russia's military lost over 15,300 tanks, fighting vehicles, artillery, and various other weapons. Russia's also lost hundreds of thousands of troops, while Ukraine has managed to have just a third of Russia's losses. American intelligence estimated that Russia has lost 87% of the troops it started the invasion of Ukraine with, with over 300,000 killed or injured. Two-thirds of its tanks were also destroyed as of February. The Russian Aerospace Forces, also known as the VKS, possessed about 900 tactical aircraft divided into fighter, attack, and fighter-bomber aircraft before the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Between then and August 2023, Russia lost between 84 and 130 of them to air defenses, crashes, and enemy fighter aircraft. Nonetheless, Russia continues its occupation of Ukraine with forces that are larger than ever. Its army is actually currently 15% larger than when it first invaded Ukraine, increasing its frontline troop strength over the past year from its 360,000 to 470,000 troops. The Russian military has drafted over 300,000 men beginning in late 2022 and has offered bonuses for volunteers. Brigades have curtailed basic training for new recruits, shipping fresh forces off to the front lines. The lack of preparation of new Russian troops has led to even quicker deaths on the front lines. A recent Estonian Defense Ministry study claims that killing 100,000 Russians would permanently damage or maybe collapse the Kremlin's mobilization. And if the numbers coming from the front lines are accurate, Ukraine could kill as many as 3 times that this year. The losses Russia is facing are unsustainable, both in terms of men and vehicles. The Russian vehicle industry produces between 500 and 600 tanks and possibly more than 1,000 or other new fighting vehicles annually. The military averages a loss of 1,000 tanks and 2,000 fighting vehicles every year. And with its occupation of Ukraine, Russia is only losing more and more of its weapons and vehicles. Now, you might ask, how does the Kremlin meet the gap in the vehicles each year? Russia's had to resort to mobilizing old Soviet tanks and fighting vehicles from the 50s through to the 70s that they had rusting away in storage. Estonian soldier and analyst Artur Rehi writes that time is running out for Russia, as recent projections suggest that by mid-2025, there may not be any old tanks and fighting vehicles left in storage. Due to the shortage of combat vehicles, Russians have had to resort to sending troops into battle in unarmored freight trucks. In late 2023, the Russian army acquired 2,100 Chinese Desert Cross 1003 all-terrain vehicles, which are basically heavy-duty golf carts. These golf carts obviously don't last long in combat with Ukrainian anti-tank missile teams and skilled drone operators, but Ukraine's lack of ammunition has caused the country's forces to retreat when they could have otherwise held with enough firepower. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, who was impeached in 2019 for attempting to coerce Ukrainian officials to support a smear campaign targeting Trump's political opponents, has called on Ukraine to surrender portions of its land to Russia. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Johnson, Trump's political ally, has been withholding ammunition and funding from Ukraine. But what's the deal with planes in particular? Why is Russia's aviation industry facing so many issues? Early 2024 has not been kind to Russia's aviation industry. Within commercial and military aviation alike, concerns over available planes, access to spare parts, and safety and maintenance are paramount. However, Ukraine recently focused on Russia's very powerful and exceptionally expensive spy planes, and has been very successful so far. Since the start of the current year, Kyiv has taken out at least 2 of Russia's rare Bereev A-50 airborne warning and control aircraft. The planes are used to help Russia monitor Ukraine's air defenses. One A-50 was taken out over the Sea of Azov in mid-January 2024, while another was taken out by the Ukrainian Air Force in late February. The A-50s generally fly with a crew of as many as 15 personnel and can cost over $300 million to produce per plane. The Russian military currently uses a modernized version of the aircraft known as the A-50U, which replaces the original craft's analog systems with digital systems that can track signals and detect targets more quickly. With the 6 planes Russia has, they're able to have A-50s airborne, providing air defense and early warning around the clock. But the loss of even one more could be catastrophic. Ukraine has also evidently targeted an aviation facility in the city of Taganrog in Russia that was meant to repair A-50s. Reports say there was a massive drone strike in the Rostov region, but no damage to city infrastructure. However, the aircraft facility close to the city was targeted, and the plant was heavily damaged. The A-50 aircraft near the facility was either destroyed or may have experienced significant damage. Russia's believed to have no more than 6 A-50s left at its disposal, and losing another would mean Russia would be unable to maintain its constant 24/7 operations. Some reports indicate Moscow might revive old A-50 airframes to increase its fleet of operational planes. This follows the trend of using old, previously unused or outdated equipment, as seen with the tanks. A-50s are generally equipped with powerful radars that operate outside the frequency of typical cameras, and can recognize the movements of land and air vehicles in a single sweep. By losing A-50s, Russia's capabilities to conduct radar reconnaissance of Ukrainian territory have declined, as has its ability to detect air targets and radar systems. According to reports from Ukraine's military, the Kremlin seeks to replace the A-50s with reconnaissance drones, with limited success. Russia kept its replacement A-50 operating over Russian territory after losing its first in 2024 to prevent losing another aircraft. But after the second was shot down, Russia grounded its planes for some time. The reconnaissance drones Russia's attempting to use may provide crucial intel in the absence of A-50s. Russia's likely using a combination of well-known drones like the Orlan 10 and the larger Orlan 30. The goal of the drones is to collect and convey information that the A-50 otherwise would have. However, even if equipped with radar, these drones lack the size and the power to provide comparable radar coverage to that of the A-50s. While no one drone can provide the same capabilities that the planes once had, different drones flown at varying altitudes could fill in some of the gaps left by the losses of the A-50s. Ukraine's Air Force has allegedly shot down many Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia has deployed recently, so it remains to be seen how successful the tactic will be. Replacing airborne early warning systems with unmanned drones or other vehicles requires years of development, time, and resources, and likely won't provide the capabilities of large airborne radar. For now, drones just provide some support in an area where Russia is seriously lacking, given its declining aviation industry. It's not just Ukrainian targeting causing the collapse of fighter jets, however. Overuse of these aircraft has also cost Russia lots of money and resources as the war continues. At the start of combat, total combat power from all areas is crucial, but as the war drags on, forces try to exhaust one another. At this point in the conflict, the total longevity of the military is what matters. In fact, one study suggests the extra hours of use that Russia has forced its aircraft to perform since February of 2022 has cost an additional 27 to 57 aircraft in imputed losses. But what does that actually mean? Well, aircraft have lifespans. They don't last forever. Planes are designed to have a total number of expected flight hours, which should be used evenly throughout the life of the aircraft and should have routine maintenance and inspections. If an aircraft was designed for, say, 3,000 flight hours with an anticipated use of 30 years, The aircraft would fly about 100 hours a year. If the wear is more or less than expected upon inspection, the projected remaining hours are adjusted accordingly. The lifespans of planes are used to plan around fuel procurement, ground maintenance, pilot training, and more. At present, the VKS is still working on transitioning from Soviet-era aircraft to more modern platforms. So newer tactical aircraft typically join the force at a rate of between 18 and 36 planes per year. Currently, about half of the VKS force is upgraded Soviet-era airframes. Newer Russian aircraft have a capacity of between 3,500 and 4,500 flight hours, though some are as high as 6,000 hours. On the other hand, the older Soviet-era planes were only meant to be in the Air Force for 2,000 to 3,500 hours on average. Some aircraft, like the MiG-31, have been upgraded to extend their service life, but many planes, including the Su-24, 25, 27, and MiG-29, are nearing the end of their service lives, with at best between 500 and 1,000 hours left. Imputed losses means the Russian military has burned through more of the expected lifespan of the aircraft more quickly than they anticipated, so they need to obtain more aircraft, increase maintenance, reduce operations, and or decrease the size of their force to account for this. At the start of the war, the VKS was flying as much as 150 to 300 sorties a day, compared to the average of 60 a day during times of peace. Even though it's since dropped to 100 sorties a day, the VKS has essentially flown double its normal annual hours since the start of the war. The extra use is equivalent to losing about 34 aircraft since the invasion first took place. But this is only capturing losses relative to the lifespan of newer airframes. Older airframes with fewer remaining hours means the actual loss might be closer to losing roughly 57 airframes. However, the exact composition of the VKS force and the plane's ages and the historical use aren't known. Some tactical aircraft aren't even working in Ukraine, but instead are used for training or harassing NATO aircraft. This could mean that even the estimate of 57 airframes is likely an underestimation. True losses might be closer to 187 VKS airframes, and so VKS can be expected to lose between 30 and 60 airframes a year from combat, accidents, and imputed losses. If things continue as is, engineers project that combat losses and imputed flight hour losses could put the VKS below 75% of its pre-war strength, requiring it to increase production, reduce usage, or reduce force structure for 3 decades. Overall, it's clear that overuse is a significant contributor to the loss of military airplanes since the start of the war. However, it's not just the technology that Russia seems to be lacking. Russia also might have run out of pilots. The destruction of Russian warships and fighter jets has suggested Russia's military cannot defend itself against Western missiles, and experienced pilots seem to be lacking as well. The recent sinking of Russia's Novichoksk warship and the destruction of Sukhoi fighter jets suggests an abundance of inexperienced Russian pilots who do not understand how to fight more experienced, seasoned pilots. Russia's transition from a socialist to a market economy has caused vast economic dislocation in Russia in recent years. Thousands of Western corporations have fled the country after Putin's invasion, with assets sold in a fire sale or nationalized outright. Russia's economy has become less modern, with new cars lacking anti-lock brakes and airbags. At the same time, its Western-made planes have been at the risk of failure because of the lack of new parts available in Russia. While fighter planes are becoming increasingly difficult to access and produce in Russia, commercial planes are experiencing similar failures and shortages. In just 1 year, Russia's rate of plane malfunctions tripled as a result of Western sanctions that were imposed on Putin's war in Ukraine that impacted the aviation industry. In recent months, Russian domestic passenger planes have repeatedly required emergency landings driven by technical issues due to a lack of spare parts. From September to December 2023, Russia experienced 60 commercial aviation incidents involving emergency landings, engine fires, and malfunctions. Planes faced many technical issues requiring them to abandon their intended routes. From January to August 2023, over 120 air accidents were reported in Russia, all of which were with civil aircraft used by Russian airlines. In 2023, the total number of plane malfunctions reached over 180. In comparison, between 2018 and 2022, only 55 accidents on average were reported annually during the same months. In 2023, engine issues accounted for about a third of incidents, and landing gear accounted for a quarter of such accidents. Brakes, flaps, air conditioning systems, and windshields also experienced issues during 2023. One Russian plane's engine caught fire during takeoff in Ulan-Ude in Buryatia, and another caught fire at Baikal International Airport. Reports of sudden cancellations and delays at Moscow airports have raised concerns about plane safety. According to the Russian Transport Ministry's plan for developing the aviation industry, the country plans to gradually reduce its use of foreign aircraft and find ways to substitute Western-made parts by 2030. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, flight safety incidents have more than doubled in Russia. One report says that in 2023, 81 cases of flight safety concerns arose, rising from 37 in 2022. But what's been causing these widespread malfunctions? Why does Russia now need to find alternatives to supplement its once abundant supply of planes? The United States government sanctioned Russian-operated planes, which has caused aircraft manufacturers to stop delivering spare parts and new planes to Russia. Spare parts not certified by aircraft manufacturers have been installed on aircraft, posing serious safety risks. Some of those sanctions include closing U.S., EU, and other allied airspaces to Russian planes, preventing Boeing, Airbus, and other plane makers from sending spare parts to Russia, and stopping countries like Turkey from refueling Russian planes. The goal of the sanctions in the West was to punish Vladimir Putin and to cut Russia off from the rest of the world. Both the U.S. and the EU have also demanded the return of aircraft leased to Russia, though the Kremlin has encouraged carriers to re-register the aircraft in Russia to get around this. Because of this, Russian planes continue to fly without receiving crucial software updates and mandatory maintenance checks to guarantee airworthiness. Russia has continued to aim to bypass the sanctions and has sought out substitutes for Western-made parts, trying to keep its aviation industry airborne with a little success. Some reports indicate that Russia has lost a whopping 76 passenger jets since February 2022 due to Western sanctions preventing them from sourcing necessary parts. Since the war started, the effect of sanctions has been immense on Russian air travel. In just a few days, Russian airlines lost international destinations, technical support for foreign planes, leasing contracts, insurance, foreign software, partnerships with outside carriers, and more. Russia now faces pressure to become self-contained by 2030 or else continue to risk severe and ongoing detriment to its aviation industry. Western plane makers, including Airbus and Boeing, have halted supplies, services, and spare parts since March 2022. Regular maintenance support also ended for Russian airlines. But the Kremlin has countered with its own sanctions, including seizing about 500 leased Western-built airliners. One estimate suggests the value of those planes is as high as $10 billion. Despite attempts to reclaim these seized planes, most leasers have had to forfeit their planes due to airspace restrictions and pushback from the Russian government and its airlines. How is Russia's economy faring with so many sanctions in place? Can the aviation industry in Russia withstand the vast devastation? To maintain its aviation industry, the country has allocated over $12 billion in state subsidies and loans. While Russia aims to develop its aviation sector using domestically sourced parts, it also resorts to purchasing aircraft from foreign lessors to prevent further seizures. However, acquiring the necessary parts for Russian planes is expensive. Before the conflict in Ukraine and subsequent Western sanctions, foreign companies supplied spare navigation systems and other vital components to Russia in case of malfunction. These parts could carry hefty price tags, sometimes exceeding $250,000 each. Russia's recent spending on aviation is almost twice the amount spent on aviation during the COVID-19 pandemic, when air travel was drastically reduced. Russia aims to produce over 1,000 planes by the end of the decade. Currently, Russian airliners operate 991 aircraft, 405 of which were produced domestically. The money Russia's been putting into its airline industry has had far-reaching economic impacts, impacting even reserve funds. According to the data, Russia spent 110 billion rubles in 2022 on compensating airliners for loss resulting from the rise in jet fuel costs. And in 2023, the National Wealth Fund faced even greater losses, with over 400 billion rubles spent on aviation that year. This amount of spending is equivalent to about 1% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, for 2023. And Russia spent 2.3 trillion rubles between 2022 and 2023 on other transportation outside of aviation. One strategic spending document suggests Russia must spend at least 711 billion rubles, equivalent to almost $8 billion, to achieve technological independence from foreign suppliers. Russia's main economic goals for its aviation industry is focusing on supporting sales, expanding production capacity, and creating a post-sales service system. However, Putin may have other concerns when it comes to aviation. With the recent Russian election, Putin may have felt a sense of electoral and reputational pressure with the threat of a collapsing aviation industry looming overhead. Analysts say that Russia's investments will at best keep its fleet flying, but Russia will probably not see its aircraft return to Western markets anytime soon. This is likely the case even if the war in Ukraine ends. The bureaucracy and the economic costs of rebuilding an entire fleet of planes with traceable safety records and approved parts will likely take a substantial amount of time and money to achieve. Russia's manufacturing and upkeep of its planes are likely behind the malfunctions and emergency landings that seem to be increasing in frequency. Russia has not only imported foreign parts from countries outside where the planes were manufactured, but the country has also been cannibalizing old planes for parts that could be used on the aircraft. The way planes have been made in recent years, especially jets like the Airbus A350, A320neo, or the Boeing 737 MAX and 787, all have technology that must be consistently updated. Many parts have limited lifespans that must be replaced regularly. As of 2022, a whopping 80% of Russia's commercial aircraft fleet were Boeings and Airbuses, which are not produced in Russia. Russia's ability to keep Western jets in the air is impressive, though its rate of failures and functioning issues are clearly concerning. But how does Russia keep those jets flying without the parts it needs? While Russia has faced sanctions from the West, some of its allies have stepped in to support the oppressive Russian campaign of occupation in Ukraine. Countries like China, Iran, and North Korea have aligned with Russia to allow the occupation of Ukraine to continue. Smuggling has also been a major source of parts. Russia received over $14 million of U.S.-made aircraft parts through the black market in 2022. For one, Russia has imported spare parts from third-party countries outside the EU and the U.S. without the manufacturer's consent. In this case, mostly Boeing and Airbus. Between May 2022, just after Russia invaded Ukraine, and August 2023, an estimated $1.2 billion worth of aircraft parts still reached Russian airlines directly for maintenance. Even more have been shipped to other companies within Russia. Russia has sought equipment and parts, either from foreign countries or its own old planes, including essential parts to keep the jets airworthy, including wing flaps, cabin pressure valves, landing gear, and cockpit displays. However, mundane spare parts items like flight attendant telephone handsets, toilet seats, and even coffee makers are also important to replace. Where exactly is Russia getting these parts from, you might ask? Customs records indicate that the parts have traveled to Russia through middlemen in countries like the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, China, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, which all have not endorsed Western sanctions on Russia. These alternate routes of acquiring spare parts have been said to reduce prices and delivery times on otherwise inaccessible foreign-made plane parts. However, for a long time, most countries in Asia and the Middle East that have not sanctioned Russia were still unwilling to provide supplies to Russia, fearing secondary sanctions from Western powers. Plus, the exports from foreign countries that are not directly from the manufacturers can cause some safety concerns. For instance, Northrop Grumman, a plane manufacturer, did not identify any sales or repair services by the company to any Russian entity since the sanctions took place. The United States government also reported that American and other Western export controls have been able to root out and disrupt illicit networks and engage with industry and other foreign governments to ensure there is compliance. The EU has also implemented systems to monitor, control, and block re-exports to Russia. Since the sanctions on Russia have been in place, Russia has turned to far smaller suppliers for the parts it needs. For instance, when maintenance company Lufthansa Technik of Germany stopped supporting Russian planes, some Russian carriers were forced to turn to smaller suppliers. S7 Engineering, for instance. The S7 Engineering Maintenance Unit had to start importing parts from a Moldova company called Air Rock Solutions. Over 14 months, S7 received at least $1.23 million in Air Rock parts, according to customs records. Some of Russia's greatest struggles include challenges with the A350 and Bombardier Q series. Since maintenance on these aircraft is traditionally carried out overseas, it's harder for many planes to be repaired in a timely manner, if at all. Clearly, the importation of foreign parts has kept Russia's aviation industry afloat, but uncertainties around the quality of said parts and the safety of the planes pose urgent concerns for many. How else does Russia keep its planes flying amidst the sanctions from the West and a crumbling industry? Well, let's take a look. Not only has Russia relied on foreign parts to keep its planes flying, but some airlines have also stripped airplanes for parts, cannibalizing old planes. By August 2022 alone, at least one Russian-made Sukhoi Superjet 1000 and one Airbus A350, both of which were operated by Aeroflot, were grounded and disassembled to provide spare parts and maintenance support for running planes. The Airbus 350 at the time of cannibalization was almost brand new. Equipment was also taken around that time from some Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s to provide spare parts for other planes of those models. As Russian carriers have begun flying fewer routes due to Western sanctions, many jets have been left unused and grounded, which can then be stripped for parts. The robbing of spare parts of planes, which may have resulted in a Frankenstein fleet being worthless outside of Russia, which has caused lessors to write off the aircraft, doubting they'll ever be returned. The potential of unairworthy parts and equipment further establishes serious safety risks. Once airline inventory gets low, carriers may even encourage pilots and mechanics to purposefully overlook certain repairs, which Aeroflot apparently did earlier in the year. As Russia continues to face sanctions and condemnation from many Western nations, it faces a crucial choice. As Western allies finally deliver F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, Russia's Air Force faces an even greater threat of destruction. Not to mention the aviation sector in Russia, both commercial and military, is crumbling from within due to overuse, sanctions necessitating cannibalization of old planes, and imported foreign parts, as well as other things. As long as the violence and occupation in Ukraine persist, Russia's aircraft shortage will continue. And with only so many old reserves to draw from, the Kremlin has limited options for fighter jets and other military weaponry moving forward. At this point, Russia must choose: continue to occupy Ukraine and further isolate itself from Western countries as its aviation industry declines, or end the violence and stop the war. Now check out analyzing Russia's massive failures in war against Ukraine, or watch this video instead. If you were ever skeptical of John F. Kennedy's assassination being an inside job, this is the story that could change your mind. Welcome to what many believe to be the most convincing of all JFK conspiracy theories. Before we talk about the evidence, and there is tons of it that may surprise even our most skeptical viewers, we need to talk a little bit about the motive. Why would the CIA, perhaps with various other officials of the American government, want to take out their own president? After all, if found guilty, it's a crime that would disgrace America forevermore. The risk involved was monumental, so there had to be a very, very big reason to go through with such a risky and treasonous plan. So we'll start our story in Cuba, Veradero Beach to be exact, about 2 hours from the capital of Havana. The French journalist Jean Daniel is having lunch in the living room of the summer residence of the Cuban leader Fidel Castro, a man the CIA went to almost ridiculous lengths to try to assassinate. At about 1:30 p.m. Cuban time, the phone rings. The news from the other end is that someone had tried to assassinate John F. Kennedy. Castro and Daniel had already talked quite a lot about Kennedy before they received that news. The Cuban leader had pointed out he was reassured by how JFK and the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had been getting along so well, and that they were possibly working to effectively end the Cold War. At one point, Castro told Daniel, "I know that for Khrushchev, Kennedy is a man you can talk with. I've gotten this impression from all my conversations with Khrushchev." Castro said he was looking forward to working with Kennedy once the president secured a second term. This was a man the CIA despised. So when news outlets confirmed that Kennedy was dead, Castro, according to Daniel, was very solemn. Castro turned to him and said, "Everything has changed. Everything is going to change." It certainly did. There were to be no more peace talks with the Soviet Union, that's for sure. The Cold War would rage on for many more years. On March 13, 1962, the United States Army General, Lyman Lemnitzer, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented a plan to the Secretary of Defense, a man JFK trusted, Robert Kennedy. Like many of the people working in the highest echelons of the American military and intelligence, Lemnitzer wanted to invade Cuba. Nonetheless, to do that, the U.S. would need a good reason, so Lemnitzer introduced Operation Northwoods to McNamara. This plan pretty much sums up the kind of people that surrounded Kennedy. Operation Northwoods was what was called a false flag operation, a fabricated event in which a fake hostile action requires an offensive response. Lemnitzer wanted to attack the U.S. military bases and blame it on the Cubans. Among the bullets and bombs, U.S. intelligence propagandists would spread rumors on the radio about this vicious attack. They would hire friendly Cubans to walk around close to the attacks in Cuban military uniforms. They then pretend to capture those men. There would be fires set, aircrafts burned, installations burned, ships attacked, and later even funerals for mock victims. Lemnitzer said they would publish casualty lists in all the biggest newspapers, along with sad stories to get enough popular support to start an invasion of Cuba. In part 4 of the proposal, he wrote, "We could develop a communist Cuba terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even Washington." He said there would be wounding of innocent people to be widely publicized. They would want to explode a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots. U.S. citizens would be outraged, and of course, they'd kill those commie terrorist bastardos. As crazy as that all sounds, it was par for the course. Such subversion was not unusual during the Cold War. Lemnitzer said all the Joint Chiefs were on board with the plan. The CIA was firing on all cylinders. They believed the evil communists had to be stopped at any cost, which is partly why the CIA committed or encouraged human rights abuses all over the world during the Cold War. This was the political environment JFK entered when he was elected president. To appreciate the JFK assassination conspiracy theory, you have to understand what lengths certain members of the U.S. military and intelligence would go to. Kennedy dismissed Operation Northwoods, telling Lemnitzer and other key advisors he could not foresee anything in the near future that would justify and make desirable use of the American forces to overthrow in Cuba. This is all well documented, as is everything we'll tell you today. JFK was isolated in his own government, according to the conspiracy theory. He'd already lost support among many of his advisors after the 1961 Bay of Pigs incident, when the CIA secretly sent 1,400 Cuban exiles that they'd trained into Cuba. Kennedy was a much younger president, one with different ideas about how to carry out politics. This plan had been drawn up during the Eisenhower administration before him, and even though JFK would go on to dismiss similar plans during his term, at the end of the day, he was expected to do what he was told. This all started when Castro's forces overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista in 1959. The CIA now wanted to throw Castro out, just as they'd covertly done with success to leaders in Iran and Guatemala, with plenty of assassinations along the way. To get the job done, exiles were trained by the U.S. and missile training camps in Guatemala. American involvement was supposed to be kept secret, which did not happen. The whole thing was a total disaster. Castro's troops won and then captured many of the exiles. Kennedy later told friends that the Bay of Pigs was a trap. The older men around him had thought that he'd be drawn into sending troops in. He told his friends Dave Powers and Ken O'Donnell they were sure I'd give in to them. He added they couldn't believe a new president like me wouldn't panic. He said they had me figured out all wrong. JFK did not trust many of the older guys who advised him, and especially the CIA director Allen Dulles. Dulles admitted in memoirs found after his death that the plan was always to get Kennedy to send in troops rather than permit the enterprise to fail. Instead, JFK handed Cuba $53 million worth of baby foods and medicine in exchange for the prisoners Castro had taken. It was a total embarrassment, and while JFK gave the green light on assassination plans for Castro, he still had to keep pushing back the hawks around him that kept telling him to invade Cuba. Then there was Vietnam. The U.S. had been active in Vietnam for years. In 1954, Vice President Richard Nixon said if the French withdrew, the United States might have to take the risk now by putting our own boys in. The CIA later helped French forces through its Saigon military mission, SMM, directing paramilitary campaigns against the communists and assisting with propaganda. The U.S. even considered using tactical nukes on Vietnam to help the embattled French under Operation Vulture. Much later, in May 1961, JFK agreed to send 500 Special Forces troops and military advisors to help the pro-Western government of South Vietnam. A year later, close to 11,000 American military advisors were working in South Vietnam, and of course, Kennedy approved that. The Americans did not want the communists overrunning Southeast Asia. So, under JFK, U.S. presence did indeed increase. But Kennedy would soon start thinking differently about Vietnam. He was under a lot of pressure to send actual combat troops to Vietnam. As the Pentagon Papers later showed, he was willing to send in advisors and let the CIA do what it needed to do, but he was against sending in units capable of independent combat. The Pentagon Papers, by the way, were thousands of pages of top-secret Department of Defense actions up until 1968 in Indochina. They were released in 1971 and showed the American public a very different side to military America, which would include secret campaigns in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. and result in many thousands of dead civilians. The CIA was out of control, which likely wouldn't have happened had JFK not been taken out. That's what the conspiracy theorists think. Daniel Ellsberg, the military analyst and activist behind the Pentagon Papers, had always been unsure about where Kennedy had stood on Vietnam. It didn't seem to make sense to him, sending in more men yet remaining reluctant to send in the combat troops. So he asked JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy, RFK, when he got the chance to in 1967. RFK, soon to be assassinated in 1968, too told him that his brother had rejected the urgent advice of every one of his top military and civilian officials, which was to send in troops. Years later, Ellsberg recorded this conversation and said that this is what RFK had said when he was asked why his brother wouldn't send in the combat troops. RFK said, "Because we already were there in 1951. We saw what was happening to the French. We saw it. My brother was determined to never let that happen to us." JFK knew what would happen partly because of the Senate Majority Leader, Mike Mansfield, who he'd sent on a fact-finding mission to South Vietnam in 1962. Mansfield returned and told JFK that getting into a war in Vietnam would be a mistake. JFK later signed a National Security Action Memorandum 217, which forbade high-ranking military and civilian personnel from going to South Vietnam without State Department clearance. This rattled the Pentagon. JFK told Mansfield he was thinking about a full withdrawal from Vietnam, but he would wait. His actual words were, "But I can't do that until 1965 after I'm re-elected. If he tried before, he'd be criticized by the conservatives and might lose some of their vote." JFK told his friend and consultant, a man we mentioned earlier, Kenneth O'Donnell, "In 1965, I'll become one of the most unpopular presidents in history. I'll be damned everywhere as a communist appeaser, but I don't care." McNamara later surprised the military hierarchy at a meeting in Honolulu when he told them 1,000 military personnel were to be withdrawn from South Vietnam by the end of the calendar year 63. McNamara told them to draw up concrete plans. It seems the military had other ideas. After JFK's death, those combat troops were sent en masse. This happened when U.S. officials and subsequently the media said there'd be an unprovoked attack on American vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin. But the facts about this attack were at best manipulated and at worst totally contrived. They served as a pretext to go to war with Vietnam. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution, written by Congress, gave the president virtually unlimited power to do whatever he wanted in Southeast Asia, a power that was very much exercised by both Lyndon B. Johnson and later Richard Nixon. Almost 200 documents that the National Security Agency, or NSA, declassified in 2005 and 2006 show us that Congress was misled. We won't go into all the details today, but what was said and what happened were two very different things. And at the time, the misinformation was enough to make war with Vietnam look justifiable. But JFK's Vietnam withdrawal in July 1993, a Canadian newspaper, through a permission request, had 21 secret letters that were written between JFK and Khrushchev declassified. They talked about mountains and lakes and other beautiful things, and they also talked about atomic weapons and the destruction of the world. In one letter, Khrushchev compared their situation to a mythological Noah's Ark, saying they might see each other as clean and unclean, but in the bigger scheme of things, they were on the same ark together and wanted the same thing. They didn't want to blow the whole world up. JFK replied, saying he liked that analogy, adding, "Whatever our differences, our collaboration to is as urgent, if not more urgent, than our collaboration to win the last world war." They might have been on friendly terms in those letters, but that didn't stop the Cuban Missile Crisis. After the Americans deployed missiles in Italy and Turkey, the Soviets deployed ballistic missiles in Cuba. This was fighting talk. In fact, what happened next is generally thought to be the closest the world ever came to nuclear war, despite both countries knowing that many millions of innocent people would die. In the middle of the crisis, JFK was under pressure to launch an attack, which he knew would mean a full-scale nuclear war. RFK, who was then the U.S. Attorney General, told the Russian ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, "We are under severe stress. In fact, we are under pressure from our military to use force against Cuba." He then said, "Please pass this message to Khrushchev through unofficial channels." He said, even though the president is against any action against Cuba, an irreversible chain of events could occur against his will. Against his will. This is important to understand. JFK knew when people such as General Curtis LeMay said hit them now and be done with it, they were deadly serious. In that particular instance, JFK replied sarcastically, "And what do you think the reprisal would be?" JFK later told his friend and special assistant, Dave Powers, "Can you imagine LeMay saying something like that? These brass hats have one advantage in their favor. If we listen to them and do what they want us to do, none of us will be alive to tell them they were wrong." JFK and Khrushchev came to an agreement. Khrushchev withdrew those missiles from Cuba. The U.S. did the same in Europe, but that was done in secret, so Mr. Khrushchev lost the vote of confidence in Russia. He was seen as a weak man for trying to save the world from obliteration. JFK later told the historian Arthur Meyer Schlesinger Jr., "The military are mad. They wanted me to do this. They were also mad at him, not just mad in general. They got even madder when he made his commencement address at the American University in Washington on June 10, 1963. He started the speech by telling the students in attendance he wanted to focus on one topic, peace. His words have gone down in U.S. history. To understand why he was taken out, you need to hear some of his speech. Like Eisenhower before him, JFK understood the danger of what had become what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. What kind of peace do we seek? JFK asked. Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on Earth worth living. The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Music to the ears of many Americans, but not what the military-industrial complex wanted to hear. He was talking about wasting billions of dollars on nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. He said peace would not be easy, but the U.S. and its enemies should work toward mutual tolerance, and he added that disarmament was favorable to war. He even had the nerve to say, "Let us re-examine our attitudes toward the Soviet Union. A war with this enemy," he said, "would destroy all we have built, all we have worked for." He said he hoped our military forces are committed to peace and discipline in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility. He said the words peace and disarmament. The word peace for the Pentagon is like garlic for a vampire. Did JFK really mean it, though? Was he serious about disarmament and ending the Cold War? Documents on this matter and his actions say yes, he was serious, according to the conspiracy theorists. With all of these talks of peace and disarmament, JFK had basically put a target on his head. Then on July 25, 1963, JFK delivered a 26-minute televised address on the nuclear